grant and the £1.5 billion for the 12 city and region growth deals, we deliver for Scotland.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SNP MPs have been disengaged from Westminster for years. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's a disgrace that their deputy leader has said should they win seats at the next general election they will not engage? Does he agree with me that members elected to this House should turn up and do their jobs?
Secretary of State.
I do agree with the Honourable Lady.
Davis.
3 years ago, on the 16th of March 2021, we had a debate in this House on precisely the subject of this question. At the time, I was concerned Nicola Sturgeon's government were covering up interference in the complaints process against the First Minister. Since then, in defiance of the Information Commissioner and of a court order, they've continued to cover up. Can the Cabinet Secretary look at whether the Ministerial Code and the Civil Service Code have been broken in this context?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to my right honourable friend that he should write to the Cabinet Secretary and ask him to do that very thing.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, successive energy ministers have hugely... Number eight.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government is firmly committed to supporting Scotland's marine energy sector to grow. Around 80% of tidal stream contracts awarded through contracts for difference in the last two rounds will be deployed in Scotland. In addition, Horizon Europe selected two Scottish-based UK tidal stream developers to develop projects in Orkney. They will lead to construction on two £17 million projects funded by the UK Government's financial guarantee.
Richard Graham.
Now, I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, and he knows that successive energy ministers have hugely helped the development of the marine energy sector in Scotland as elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Would my honourable friend agree with me that there is an opportunity in the next round of renewables auction to allow for wave technologies alongside tidal stream technologies? And will he also encourage the Scottish Government to speed up approvals of the sites so that we can get great green energy projects started as soon as possible in Scotland as elsewhere?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for my honourable friend for that important question. The Government is undertaking an analysis of the technology pipeline available for contracts for difference auction round 6 against our legal obligation to ensure the auction round is competitive. We are considering the appropriate parameters for all technologies, including tidal stream and wave energy. Final parameters will be published in the budget notice this month ahead of the auction round opening.
Dave Dougal.
The Sea Star tidal farm off the coast of Orkney is set to be the largest tidal energy farm anywhere in the world and was supported by EU funding through the European Marine Energy Centre. This comes after Edinburgh University's report finds that the UK Government can save hundreds of millions of pounds by bringing forward the development of tidal by years if it worked closer with its EU partners. It's quite clear that the EU's role in this in Europe and around Scotland is very important. So if Scotland is better together with anyone, isn't it better together with the EU and its investment in tidal?
Mr. Speaker, what a load of nonsense from the honourable member. Scotland is much better served by being part of the United Kingdom and will continue to support all renewable energy sectors, including tidal.
Jamie Stone.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this Government recognises the invaluable work that all NHS workers do. I see this every day of the week in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. That's why the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care has written to the Scottish Government regarding working together to reduce patient waiting times. We continue to be open to exploring this further.
Mr. Speaker, I have a lady constituent who suffers from a rare and dangerous condition called subglottal stenosis. There is only one clinic that has expertise to treat this condition, and it is in London. And yet our local health board is refusing to refer her. They say they can offer another treatment, but it is thought to be less safe and possibly not very effective. So can I ask, what steps is the Government taking to ensure that patients, regardless of which side of the border they live, will get the best possible treatment?
Here, Jim.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm regularly reminded, particularly as an MP for the borders, of the need of healthcare that benefits on either side of the border, particularly cross-border working with the NHS. Local people in the borders often get treatment faster and easier because of it. Sadly, the honourable member has highlighted a real problem with Scotland's NHS thanks to the mismanagement by the SNP government of Edinburgh, particularly of rural health services. Now, he's identified a very distressing case for his constituent, and I'm very happy to write to the Scottish Government along with him to raise this case with them.
Theresa Villiers.
Question 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland Office ministers have banged the drum tirelessly to promote the Scottish food and drink industry overseas, including on trade missions in Europe, India, the United States of America and Vietnam. In Vietnam, sales of Scotch whisky have already increased fourfold and are still growing, Mr. Speaker. And I was delighted to discuss what more can be done to improve trade links and market access with the Vietnamese government during my recent visit.
Scotland's farming and fish sector produces some of the finest produce in the world, so will the Secretary of State do all he can to promote the sale of Scottish smoked salmon abroad as a premium product known the world over?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think I heard smoked salmon, Mr. Speaker, and it's not just smoked salmon. The most recent figures show that Scotland's world-leading food and drink sector accounted for 29% of all UK food and drink exports. To help the sector continue to flourish, this government has secured trade agreements with 71 non-EU countries and the EU, and the total UK trade with these partners is worth £808 billion.
Shannon.
Thank the Minister for that answer. Minister, Scotland's food exports have shown...
The order. Mr Cunningham, sit down. Jim Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scotland's food exports, some of those companies have been prevented of trading with Northern Ireland. There is now an Intertrade UK body set up as a result of the discussions that have taken place. Can I ask the Minister this question? What is the Minister and his department doing to ensure that those companies who have stopped trading are encouraged to start trading again with Northern Ireland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that in the UK command paper, we're setting up the East-West Council, and the East-West Council will work to bring around those solutions.
Jim Blackburn.
Question number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
I'm popular today, Mr. Speaker. The UK government is working tirelessly to maximise opportunities following our departure from the European Union. Scotland continues to punch above its weight, both in exports of goods and services and foreign direct investment, and I'm delighted to be able to say that trade is now well above pre-Brexit levels.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland has been hammered by Westminster's imposition of a hard Brexit, with the Scottish salmon industry alone suffering additional £12 million of Brexit red tape costs. Across every sector of Scotland's economy, Brexit has added red tape costs, limited access to vital workers and limited markets. Is the Secretary of State proud of his legacy and includes a deliberate and avoidable undermining of Scotland's economy?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will appreciate, our departure from the EU has allowed us to forge new relationships. Consequently, Scotland's exports are performing well, up 13%.
David Doig.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Will friends join me in welcoming the completion of fisheries negotiations with Faroe, resulting in 2,200 tonnes of fishing quota, mostly for the Scottish fleet? And will he also agree that since the UK became an independent coastal state, the Scottish fleet and those who negotiate on their behalf, including the SNP, Scottish Government ministers and their officials, have a far stronger voice in these annual negotiations than if the SNP had their way and went back into the EU and the common fisheries policy?
My honourable friend is a great champion for the fishing industry, and I completely agree with him.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions, but we are joined today in the gallery by the Speaker of the Supreme Council of the Kyrgyz Republic. I now call Charlotte Littles.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others In addition to my duties in this House, including listening to the Chancellor's budget statement, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK used to be a world leader in psilocybin research, but despite the calls from the Home Affairs Select Committee, leading researchers, charities and veterans organisations and the Royal College of Psychiatrists, we've shamefully fallen behind on breakthrough treatment for conditions like PTSD and depression, causing misery to millions of people in our country. Can the Prime Minister explain why this policy remains the responsibility of a Home Office that can't give it the attention it deserves, and why it's okay that American, Canadian and Australian patients can access treatment British patients can't?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I completely sympathise and understand why people suffering from distressing conditions will want to seek the best possible treatment available, and I thank the Honourable Lady for raising the issue. We are committed to ensuring that the UK is a world-leading jurisdiction for pharmaceutical, clinical and other medical research, and we have, in fact, asked the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs to review barriers to legitimate medical research involving controlled drugs such as psilocybin. Our response to the Council's recommendations, I'm pleased to tell the Honourable Lady, will be published as soon as possible.
Dr. Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency has a long and proud history of farming, with generations of the same family helping to feed our nation. And not since World War II have we been so aware of how important food security is to our national security. So will the Prime Minister update the House on what his government is doing to support our fantastic farmers?
Mr. Speaker, as I set out at the NFU conference just a couple of weeks ago, we will always back British farmers to continue to produce fantastic food. We're accelerating that plan with the largest package of grants ever, and indeed one of those new schemes opens just today, supporting farmers with up to £125,000 towards the purchase of new equipment and technology. Our schemes in England are all about more choice, Mr. Speaker, not less, and unlike Labour in Wales, we will never introduce top-down arbitrary targets that damage farm incomes, damage our food security and take farmers back to square one.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 years ago, Sarah Everard was walking home when she was abducted and murdered by a serving police officer who should have been trusted to keep her safe. As a father, I can't imagine the pain her parents, her family and her friends are going through in this difficult anniversary week. Lady Angelina's report exposes the appalling failure in police vetting and in misconduct processes, and I'm very troubled by its conclusion that there is, and I'm going to quote it, nothing to stop another Cousins operating in plain sight. How can that be the case 3 years on from this horrendous crime?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I firstly say that I'm sure all members of the House will have been thinking about Sarah Everard in recent weeks. It was, as the Honourable Gentleman said, an absolutely shocking case, and the abuse of power in particular was appalling. That's why we took action quickly, Mr. Speaker, to strengthen police vetting, strengthen the rules for rooting out officers who are not fit to serve, and conducted the largest ever screening of all serving officers and staff. We're now ensuring that any officer who has been charged for a crime will be suspended from duty automatically until their case is concluded, and we will thoroughly consider all of the report's recommendations and respond in full.
The Prime Minister mentions vetting, and I just want to press on that because serious failures in police vetting were raised in independent reports as long ago as 2012, 2019, 2022 and 2023. And that's why Labour's been arguing for mandatory national vetting standards, which would stop anybody with a history of domestic abuse or sexual offending being allowed to join the police in the first place. Why are mandatory national vetting standards not already in place?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is vital for public confidence that those that are not fit to wear the badge are rooted out of the police and not able to join in the first place. That's why the College of Policing has updated its existing statutory code on vetting, and that happened quickly. And in addition, the Policing Inspectorate, Mr. Speaker, carried out a rapid inspection of all forces' progress against the previous findings,
And, in addition to that, an entire check against the National Police database was carried out for all serving officers and staff.
Mr. Speaker, I'm obviously very familiar with codes in criminal justice systems, but this is too serious for that. There's a world of difference between a code and binding mandatory standards, which don't have legal effect, and that should trouble members across the House. Yeah. Cousin's history of sexual offending stretched back many years. On 4 occasions, despite allegations of indecent exposure, he wasn't sacked. We know indecent exposure is a gateway to more horrific crimes, as was tragically shown to be the case not only in Sarah Everard's case, but also Libby Squire. But it's not treated with the seriousness required. The Angelina report recommends reviewing all indecent exposure allegations against serving officers in order to identify, investigate and remove those officers from service. Now, given the obvious urgency of this recommendation, can the Prime Minister give a categorical assurance that it will be implemented immediately?
Mr. Speaker, as the Home Secretary addressed this specifically when he made his statement, indecent exposure, just like any other kind of sexually motivated crime, is abhorrent. And we expect police chiefs to take it extremely seriously. We fully expect police chiefs to suspend an officer charged with any kind of sexually motivated crime. And it's worth pointing out, in addition to the new powers that the Home Secretary outlined about automatic suspension, Chief Constables already do have existing powers to suspend any officer in their force when allegations are made, and we fully expect them to use those powers.
It's all fine, is it? It's all okay?
Well, I do think the recommendation I referred to should be implemented urgently, and I ask the Prime Minister to look again at that, because every day that goes past when it isn't implemented carries risk for victims in these cases. Sarah Everard's murder should, of course, been a watershed moment on policing reform, on the criminal justice system, on violence against women and girls. But the sad reality is that victims of rape who have the courage and bravery to come forward have just a 2.4% chance of their perpetrators being caught and charged within the year. How does the Prime Minister expect women to have confidence in the criminal justice system when almost all rapists don't see the inside of a courtroom?
Mr. Speaker, as we acknowledged a couple of years ago, of course we need to do more to improve rape outcomes in the criminal justice system. And the Rape Action Review Plan, is showing considerable progress, Mr. Speaker. We've already increased the average sentences for rape by a third since Labour were last in office, Mr. Speaker. By the way, using a power that the Labour Party voted against in this House. And thanks to our action plan, we've seen police referrals double, charges double, and last year there was a 50% increase in rape convictions, and now rapists will serve every single day of their sentence behind bars. And the honourable gentleman did raise his time at the Crown Prosecution Service, but he hasn't acknowledged that under his tenure, rape convictions actually dropped.
Well, the Prime Minister knows that is going to be fact-checked. He also knows I support tough sentences. I really do think that the victims of violence against women and girls deserve better than this nonsense from the Prime Minister. It needs to be taken seriously. It's not games, Prime Minister. We all want more victims to come forward, but we have to be honest. Unless things change, the criminal justice system will continue to fail them. That's why we're committed to introducing specialist rape and sexual offences teams in every force to give victims specialist support and confidence that their experience will be investigated properly. When will the Prime Minister commit to doing the same?
Mr. Speaker, we've already implemented a Rape Action Review Plan. He says we're taking this seriously. Here are the things that we have done, Mr. Speaker. We have ended
the appalling digital strip search that victims had to go through with their mobile phones. We've ensured that there's better use of pre-recorded cross-examination. We've rolled out Operation Sorteria with incredible success across all national police forces, and we have increased significantly the number of sexual domestic violence and abuse advisors to up to 1,000, and there is more specialist training in all police forces for these prosecutions. That is a plan that we've already put in place. It's a plan that is working to ensure that we can keep women and girls in our country safe.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is the rosy picture the Prime Minister tries to paint of criminal justice. And with the publication of the Angelina report, the country deserves to know that we're doing all we can to make our country safe for women. That starts with what should be the most basic task, creating a safe workplace here in Westminster. And at the moment, as everyone in this House knows, we are failing in that endeavour, and we all have a duty to change this. So when will he make time for the vote on banning from Parliament MPs who face allegations of sex offences?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely right that we ensure our communities are safe for women and girls. That's why we passed the landmark Domestic Abuse Act. That's why we set up a new 24/7 victim support line. It's why we've quadrupled funding for victim support, and why we are investing in practical things like CCTV and better street lighting in safer communities up and down the country. Now, of course, there is always more we can do, but this government has a strong track record in ensuring that women across this country will feel safe.
Andrew Rosendahl.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I want the Prime Minister to know that the people of Romford are struggling with ever-increasing energy prices, yet providers are making huge profits, running into hundreds of millions. So, does the Prime Minister agree with me that reductions in wholesale prices should be passed on to the consumers and standing charges brought down? And will the government hold utility companies to account for their actions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight the challenge that high energy bills have posed, not just to his constituents in Romford, but across the country. That's why we stepped in with a significant package of support, paying for around half of a typical household energy bill when prices were at their highest. My honourable friend, I know, will join me in welcoming the fact that the energy price cap is set to fall by almost £250 in April, which will bring relief to many families, but we must hold companies to account, and that's why we introduced the energy profits levy on the windfall profits caused by an unexpected increase in energy prices, and we are going further to cut costs for people by cutting their taxes and putting more money in their family bank accounts.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, much to my surprise this morning, it's been widely reported that the Conservative Party in Scotland are absolutely furious that Westminster is about to tax Scotland's natural resources in order to pay for a tax cut in England. Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister in danger of turning his colleagues into nationalists?
Mr. Speaker, obviously I wouldn't comment on the budget, but what I would say is, when I was in Scotland last week, it was crystal clear. There has only ever been one party consistently standing up for the North Sea energy industry, and it's the Scottish Conservatives.
The Prime Minister knows that not to be the case, but there's a serious point to be made here, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party want to use Scotland's natural resources to pay for tax cuts in England. The Labour Party want to use Scotland's natural resources to pay for nuclear power stations in England, and the cost of that up to 100,000 jobs. Scotland's wealth, Scotland's resources, Scotland's jobs, all again to Westminster. But with the Tories on just 15% in the polls in Scotland now, will the Prime Minister do us all a favour and call a general election?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman claims to be supportive of the North Sea energy industry. Why is it that he's opposed all the measures that we have taken to protect those jobs in Scotland over the past couple of years? He talks about tax in Scotland and England. I'll just gently point out to him that thanks to the actions of the Chancellor and this UK government, everyone in Scotland has received a significant tax cut from January this year. And in contrast to the Chancellor's last budget, the SNP's budget put taxes up for working Scots. Scotland is now the high-tax capital of the UK, but this Conservative government is going to keep cutting taxes for hard-working Scots.
Mr. Speaker, the government is rightly acting to properly compensate the Horizon victims who are highlighted by Alan Bates's legal challenge. However, there are thousands more sub-postmasters across the country who are not actually prosecuted, but who faced financial penalties for bogus shortfalls, causing enormous financial and personal distress to them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we should now be doing everything possible to do right by all victims of gross miscarriage of justice, clear their names and, at last, properly financially compensate?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the appalling impact this miscarriage of justice has had on people's mental health. As he acknowledged, our focus is on delivering justice for the postmasters, and that's why we will introduce legislation to overturn convictions and pave the way for the swift payment of compensation, which he acknowledged. But I thank my right honourable friend for his long-standing campaign on this issue about mental health, and I can assure him that the Postal Minister is closely examining the issues he raises. He's considering next steps and will keep the right honourable gentleman closely informed.
Sir Geoffrey Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that the Government's proposals to deal with the legacy of our troubled past in Northern Ireland continue to be the subject of scrutiny, most recently in the High Court ruling in relation to compatibility with our human rights obligations. And yet, many families of victims in Northern Ireland are deeply disappointed with the lack of cooperation by the Irish Government in relation to murders committed in their jurisdiction or from their jurisdiction. In relation to the Omagh bomb inquiry, for example, the Irish Government has declined to conduct a public inquiry on this worst atrocity in our troubled past, despite the courts urging it to do so. Will the Prime Minister continue to press the Irish Government on the need for them to make available facilities to enable the families of innocent victims, including in Omagh, to pursue justice for their loved ones?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his question on this important topic, which I know will be of great interest not just to his constituents but many others across Northern Ireland. The Government has set forward its plans to deal with the legacy of the past and will continue to engage with everyone in Northern Ireland, whatever their views, to set out the best way forward. But I can confirm to him that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has raised these specific issues directly with the Irish Government and will continue to do so. And I also spoke to the Taoiseach myself about this very matter. We would hope to see further cooperation on Omagh and many other outstanding cases that involve Irish jurisdiction, because, like him, I want to give families as much information as possible.
Hello, Plesty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Putin's put the Russian economy on a total war footing. He has increased military spending by 68% to 7.5% of GDP. He claimed this month that over 520,000 new jobs have been created in their arms industry, which now employs an estimated 3.5 million Russians. On my recent visits to Ukraine, I have met with government ministers and senior military figures who have expressed great frustration to me about the length of time it is taking to develop collaboration in building a defence manufacturing capability jointly with UK defence companies in Ukraine. So will my honourable friend meet with me to discuss how we can unblock the bureaucracy and, as our Ukrainian friends say, build the arsenal of the free world together?
Well, I can reassure my honourable friend that we remain steadfast in our support for Ukraine, and we will not allow Putin to achieve his aim of eradicating Ukrainian freedom and democracy. Our cross-government task force is working diligently to support both the armed forces of Ukraine and lead UK and Ukrainian defence industrial cooperation. I'm pleased to say in December last year we conducted our first successful trade mission to Ukraine alongside the UK defence industry, but I can tell him that the government and UK industry will continue to work hand in glove with our Ukrainian allies, seizing the opportunities for collaboration and bolstering our joint defence industries.
Stringer.
Mr. Speaker, last week the IPPR published a paper, The State of the North,
That paper predicted that wealth inequalities, already too large between the North and the South East, would increase to nearly £250,000 per head by the end of this decade. Does the Prime Minister accept that his levelling up agenda has failed, or did he never want it to succeed?
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, inequality in our country has actually declined under this Conservative government. And when it comes to levelling up in the North, it's actually the North that has received some of the highest amounts of per capita levelling up funding of any region in the country. And I know when he last popped up to ask me a question about our investment in the North, I was wondering if he's managed to get an answer as to what exactly the Labour Party's position on HS2 is. Because I'd still like to know, because what we're doing is taking that money and reinvesting every penny of it across the North in forms of transportation that people use every day, delivering benefits quicker to communities not just in his constituency but across the entire North, and it's been warmly welcomed everywhere that I've been.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that the performance of the Labour Party in voting down our Rwanda bill in the House of Lords is a disgrace? It is only the Conservative government and the Conservatives who have a plan for dealing with illegal immigration and the People's Fund. Action on illegal immigration is a top priority in my constituency, and Labour has no policy or plan on this at all.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. He knows, like I know, that if you want to fully stop the boats, you need to have a working deterrent. That means if someone comes here illegally, you must be able to remove them to a safe third country alternative. That's why the Rwanda scheme is so important, and that's why we're determined to see it through. But it was just in the last week an independent report was published talking about the Labour Party's policies in this area, which made it crystal clear that they don't have a plan to stop the boats, and in fact their idea would see the UK accept hundreds of thousands more migrants.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Which part of his economic legacy is the Prime Minister most proud of? Is it presiding over the highest tax burden since the Second World War? Or is it delivering the slowest real wage growth since the Napoleonic War?
Mr. Speaker, saving 10 million jobs in the pandemic with the furlough scheme.
The Prime Minister will know that there is consensus across this House on the need to build new houses. Where that consensus breaks down is where those houses should be built. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that wherever possible, new houses should be built on brownfield sites, not on green spaces, not on greenfield, and certainly not on prime farmland?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It's sustainable planning that must be at the heart of our planning system, and that's why we're committed to meeting the needs of communities by building homes in the right places and, as he says, making best use of brownfield land. We've made it clear that that's what should be the priority. We've put extra funding aside to unlock those sites, and our recent changes to the MPPF provide clearer protection for the Green Belt, making it clear how future housing supply should be assessed. And that is the clear difference between our two parties. On this side of the House, we will protect the Green Belt, and the Labour Party will concrete right all over it.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in some jurisdictions, ministers routinely publish their tax returns. The Prime Minister voluntarily published his UK tax returns last year. Does the Prime Minister agree that ministers of the Crown should publish their tax returns as a matter of course? And has he ever filed any returns in the USA that have not been published?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think that would be proportionate or appropriate. And what I've done is... No, I don't think it would be proportionate for all ministers to publish their tax returns. In keeping with long-standing tradition, I voluntarily published my tax return, as did the Chancellor. I think that is the right balance, and I've been completely transparent about that as I've done it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, a number of us were on the first transatlantic flight powered by sustainable aviation fuel. This week, IAG made its first major purchase of that fuel. But that fuel is coming from the United States. And it's really important that we have a SAF industry in this country. So will the Prime Minister tell the Treasury and the Department of Transport to accelerate the work they're doing, to put in place the right framework and the right support mechanisms to ensure we have a SAF industry for our aviation sector for the future?
Can I first of all thank my honourable friend for his championing of this cause, which I think is absolutely right, and reassure him that we are committed to ensuring that the SAF mandate is in place in 2025. That will require about 10% of jet fuel to be made from sustainable feedstock by 2030. And to get there, we've provided, I'm pleased to tell him, £135 million to 13 different UK sustainable aviation fuel projects to kickstart our domestic industry. And, which he also knows is important, we've committed to introducing a revenue certainty mechanism to support SAF production in the UK as soon as practically possible.
Sam Dixon.
Thank you. Chester's 2,000-year-old Roman walls are an important historic monument of world renown. Will the PM join me in Chester to walk the walls and explore how the government can support the upkeep of these important structures, which, unlike the Conservative Party, are stable, solid, and in no danger of imminent collapse?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join the honourable lady in paying tribute to the history of her local community, and I'm pleased that the City of Chester is benefiting from so much investment from the Conservative government so that it can maintain its local infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5 weeks ago, Conservative MPs from across South East London and Kent wrote to Transport for London and the Labour Mayor of London, calling on them to do the right thing following the botched implementation of a temporary 40-mile-an-hour speed limit on the A20 near Sidcup, which has seen thousands of drivers unfairly issued fines and points on their licence. This has left many drivers, including carers, emergency service workers and teachers, at risk of losing their licences and jobs. This is despite travelling less than 50-mile-an-hour zones. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that TfL, the Met Police and Sadiq Khan must come clean about the number of fines and cancel these issued points?
Can I thank my honourable friend for this question, and I do understand the concerns that local drivers have over this ongoing TfL issue. Whilst we're doing everything we can to back motorists across the country, it is disappointing that the Labour Mayor and indeed Labour-run Wales are hammering drivers at every opportunity, whether that's temporary speed limits or blanket 20-mile-an-hour zones or the ULEZ expansion. But I will make sure that my honourable friend has a meeting with a responsible minister to discuss his concerns.
Mr. Speaker, to strengthen current spiking legislation, forensic evidence is essential. The NHS does not have uniform policy for the screening of suspected victims of spiking at A&E. We can pass all the laws we want in this place, but to achieve justice, this forensic evidence is vital. Will the Prime Minister commit to ensuring that hospital emergency departments have a statutory obligation to take forensic samples from these victims?
I agree with the honourable lady that spiking is an appalling, violating crime which seriously undermines public safety, particularly the safety of women and girls, and we want to make sure that the existing laws recognise the threat that spiking poses, and that's why at the end of last year we announced a raft of new measures to confront spiking and support victims, including changing the law to make it clear without any doubt that spiking is illegal, as well as other measures like an online reporting tool, investing in research and rapid testing kits, and training for bar staff. But I'll ensure that we look into the issue that she raises and write back to her.
Final question, Ben Bradley.
This winter, flood and storm damage has caused significant damage to the infrastructure in and around my Mansfield constituency. That's our roads, it's our drains, it's flood infrastructure, and this is among the highest concern that residents raise with me on a regular basis. I'm really grateful that from next year in particular, there's very significant infrastructure funding coming our way. But what can my right honourable friend do to help fix this for my constituents now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that in 2020 we announced that we would double our flood investment to a record £5 5.2 billion, and in Nottinghamshire, since 2010, we've invested over 50 million to protect 15,000 properties. And I know currently there is a programme in Mansfield which is looking at surface water and drainage improvements, but I will make sure that I talk to the Chancellor that we have a strong economy to keep investing in local infrastructure in his area, and that's exactly what we're about to hear from our right honourable friend in just a second.
Completes Prime Minister's questions.
There you go. Gracefully, Mom turns up.
Order! Order! Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I remind honourable members that copies of the budget resolutions will be available to them from the Vote Office in Members' Lobby and online at the end of the Chancellor's statement. I also remind honourable members that interventions are not taken during the Chancellor's statement, nor during the replies of the Leader of the Opposition, or indeed of the spokesman for the Scottish National Party. I'm hoping that the hubbub on my right here is going to die down and some politeness will prevail before I call the Chancellor. Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as we mourn the tragic loss of life in Israel and Gaza, the Prime Minister reminded us last week of the need to fight extremism and heal divisions. So I start today by remembering the Muslims who died in 2 world wars in the service of freedom and democracy. We need a memorial to honour them, so following representations from the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove and others, I've decided to allocate £1 million towards the cost of building one. Whatever your faith or colour or class, this country will never forget the sacrifices made for our future. Madam Deputy Speaker, in recent times the UK and the UK economy has dealt with a financial crisis, a pandemic and an energy shock caused by war in Europe. Yet despite the most challenging economic headwinds in modern history, under Conservative governments since 2010, growth has been higher than every large European economy. Unemployment has halved, absolute poverty has gone down, and there are 800 more people in jobs for every single day that we've been in office. Of course, interest rates remain high as we bring down inflation. But because of the progress we've made, because we are delivering the Prime Minister's economic priorities, we can now help families not just with temporary cost of living support, but with permanent cuts in taxation. We do this to give much needed help in challenging times, but also because Conservatives know lower taxes mean higher growth. And higher growth means more opportunity, more prosperity and more funding for our precious public services. But if we want that growth...
Order. The Chancellor has hardly said anything. Order! You can't get excited yet. Now, other people want to hear what the Chancellor has to say, and it's matters. So we'll have a bit of good behaviour, please. Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we want that growth to lead to higher wages and higher living standards for every family in every corner of the country, it cannot come from unlimited migration. It can only come by building a high-wage, high-skill economy, not just higher GDP, but higher GDP per head. And that is the difference with the party opposite. Their plans destroy jobs, reduce opportunities, and risk family finances with spending that pushes up taxes. Instead of going back to square one, the policies I announced today mean more investment, more jobs, better public services and lower taxes in a budget for long-term growth. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I start with the updated forecast from the OBR, for which I thank Richard Hughes and his team. First, inflation. When the Prime Minister and I came to office, it was 11%. The latest figures show... I know the party opposite struck...
No, this is not amusing anymore. We need to hear what the Chancellor has to say. I can tell who's making the noise, and you simply won't get a chance to speak later. So that's the end of it. Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister and I came to office, inflation was 11%, but the latest figures show it is now 4%, more than meeting our pledge to halve it last year. And today's forecasts from the OBR show it falling below the 2% target in just a few months' time, nearly a whole year earlier than forecast in the autumn statement. That didn't happen by accident. Whatever the pressures and whatever the politics, a Conservative government working with the Bank of England will always put sound money first. But we also understand that tackling inflation, while necessary, is painful. It means higher interest rates and a period of lower growth. So we've given the average household £3,400 in cost of living support over the last 2 years. Doing so makes economic as well as moral sense. The OBR predicted real household disposable income per person would fall by 2% in the last year. Instead, after this support, it is on track to rise by 0.8%. And today I take further steps to help families with cost of living pressures, starting with measures to help the poorest families. We've already abolished higher charges for electricity paid by those on prepayment meters, increased the local housing allowance, and raised benefits by double expected inflation. Today I focus on those falling into debt. Nearly 1 million households on universal credit take out budgeting advance loans to pay for more expensive emergencies like boiler repairs or help getting a job. To help make such loans more affordable, I've today decided to increase the repayment period for new loans from 12 months to 24 months. For some people, I thought they cared about people on the lowest income. Trust the Labour Party not to want to hear about debt. For some people, the best way to resolve debt is through a debt relief order. But getting one costs £90, which can deter the very people who need them the most. So having listened carefully to representations from citizens' advice, I today relieve pressure on around 40,000 families every year by abolishing the £90 charge completely. Next, the Household Support Fund. It was set up on a temporary basis and due to conclude at the end of this month. Having listened carefully to representations from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Trussell Trust, and honourable members from East Ham, Colchester, Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, and Suffolk Coastal, amongst others, I've decided that with the battle against inflation still not over, now is not the time to stop the targeted help it offers. We will therefore continue it at current levels for another 6 months. Next, I turn to a measure that will help businesses and households more broadly. In the autumn statement, I froze alcohol duty until August of this year. Without any action today, it would have been due to rise by 3%. But I've listened carefully to my right honourable friends from Altrincham and Sale West, the Vale of Glamorgan, and my right honourable friend from Murray, who is a formidable champion of the Scottish whisky industry. I also listened to Councillor John Tonks from Ash, a strong supporter of the wonderful Admiral pub, who pointed out the pressures facing the industry. So today I've decided to extend the alcohol duty-frees until February 2025. This benefits 38,000 pubs across the UK, and on top of the £13,000 saving a typical pub will get from the 75% business rates discount I announced in the autumn. We value our hospitality industry and are backing the great British pub. Another cost that families and businesses worry about is fuel. Now, the Shadow Chancellor complained about the freeze on fuel duty, and Labour has opposed it at every opportunity. The Labour Mayor of London wants to punish motorists even more with his ULEZ plans, but lots of families and sole traders depend on their car. If I did nothing, fuel duty would increase by 13% this month. So instead, I've listened to my right honourable friends for Stoke-on-Trent North, Dudley North, Witham and others, as well as the Sun newspaper's Keep It Down campaign. I have, as a result, decided to maintain the 5p cut and freeze fuel duty for another 12 months. This will save the average car driver £50 next year and bring total savings since the 5p cut was introduced to around £250. Taken together with the alcohol duty freeze, this decision also reduces headline inflation by 0.2 percentage points in 24/5, allowing us to make faster progress towards the Bank of England's 2% target. Madam Deputy Speaker, there can be no solid growth without solid finances. An economy based on sound money does not pass its bills to the next generation. When it comes to borrowing, some believe there is a trade-off between compassion and fiscal responsibility. They are wrong. It is only because we responsibly reduce the deficit by 80% between 2010 and 2019 that we could provide £370 billion to help businesses and families in the pandemic. The party opposite opposed our plans to reduce the deficit every single step of the way. But in fairness, they were consistent. The Lib Dems supported controlling spending in coalition, but now say they would prop up a party that will turn on the spending taps. It's the difference between no plan and no principles. And I'm delighted the right honourable gentleman from the Lib Dems was here to hear it for once. Today, we say something different. There is nothing compassionate about running out of money. With the pandemic behind us, we must once again be responsible and build up our resilience to future shocks. That means bringing down borrowing so we can start to reduce our debt. And today's figures confirm that is happening. Ahead of my first autumn statement in 22, the OBR forecast headline debt would rise to above 100% of GDP. Today, they will say it will fall in every year to just 94% by 28-29. Underlying debt, which excludes Bank of England debt, will be 91.7% in 24/5, according to the OBR, then 92.8%, 93.2%, 93.2% before falling to 92.9% in 28-29, with final year headroom against debt falling of £8.9 billion. Our underlying debt is therefore on track to fall as a share of GDP, meeting our fiscal rule. And we continue to have the second lowest level of government debt in the G7, lower than Japan, France or the United States. We also meet our second fiscal rule for public sector borrowing to be below 3% of GDP 3 years early. Borrowing falls from 4.2% of GDP in 23/4 to 3.1%, 2.7%, 2.3%, 1.6% and 1.2% in 2028-29. By the end of the forecast, borrowing is at its lowest level of GDP since 2001. None of that, of course, would be possible if Labour implemented their pledge to decarbonise the grid 5 years early by 2030. By their own calculations, that costs £28 billion a year to do. But last month, after flip-flopping for months, they said they're not going to spend the £28 billion after all, but somehow they'll meet their pledge. Somehow, Madam Deputy Speaker, can only mean one thing: tax rises on working families. Same old Labour. Today, in contrast, a Conservative government brings down taxes with borrowing broadly unchanged. In fact, borrowing is slightly lower than the autumn statement. And the fact that we are bringing borrowing down is something of particular importance to one very special person. Sir Robert Stamen is the outgoing Chief Executive of the Government's Debt Management Office. And after 20 years of exceptional public service, he is in the gallery. Thank you, Sir Robert. I now turn to growth. Just after I became Chancellor, the OBR expected GDP to fall by 1.4% in the following year. In fact, it grew, albeit slowly. Now the OBR expects the economy to grow by 0.8% this year and 1.9% next year, 0.5% higher than their autumn forecast. After that, growth rises to 2.2%, 1.8% and 1.7% in 2028. Since 2010, they don't want to hear this, but these are the facts. Since 2010, we have grown faster than Germany, France or Italy, the three largest European economies. And according to the IMF, we will continue to grow faster than all three of them in the 5 years ahead. Surveys by Lloyds and Deloitte show business confidence is returning. In other words, because we have turned the corner on inflation, we will soon turn the corner on growth. And today's OBR forecasts also show that we have made good progress on the Prime Minister's three economic priorities. Compared to when the three pledges were made, inflation has halved, debt is falling in line with our fiscal rules, and growth is fully 1.5 percentage points higher than predicted. And as growth returns, they don't have a growth plan, so they might as well listen to ours. As growth returns, our plan is for economic growth not sustained through migration, but one that raises wages and living standards for families. Not just higher GDP, but higher GDP per head, and that means sticking to our plan with a budget for long-term growth, more investment, more jobs, better public services and lower taxes. And I start with investment. Economists say that stimulating investment is the most effective way to raise productivity and therefore wages and living standards. Since 2010, we've been doing just that. Business, well, you might want to listen to what I'm about to say because business investment has risen from an average of 9.3% of GDP under Labour to 9.9% under the Conservatives. And this year it will be 10.6% of GDP. That is £30 billion more business investment than if it had continued at Labour levels. And it's still going up. In the short period since the autumn statement, Nissan have announced they'll build 2 new electric car models in the UK. Microsoft and Google have announced data centres worth over £3 billion. Thanks to my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, the Global Investment Summit unlocked £30 billion of investment. In fact, since 2010, greenfield foreign direct investment has been higher than anywhere else in Europe. And for the last 3 years, we have been the third highest in the world after the United States and China. And we're not stopping there. In the autumn statement, I announced we would introduce permanent full expensing, a £10 billion tax cut for businesses that gives the UK the most attractive investment tax regime of any large European or G7 country. It was welcomed by over 200 business leaders, with the CBI saying it was a game changer and the single most transformational thing we could do to fire up the British economy. And today I take further steps to boost investment. Having listened to calls from the CBI, Make UK and the BCC, we'll shortly publish draft legislation for full expensing to apply to leased assets, a change I intend to bring in as soon as it's affordable. We'll also help small businesses, something close to my own heart, as well as the business rate support and work on prompt payments I announced in the autumn. I'll provide £200 million of funding to extend the recovery loan scheme as it transitions to the growth guarantee scheme, helping 11,000 SMEs access the finance they need. And following representations from the Federation of Small Business, as well as honourable members for Loughborough, Southend West and Rother Valley, I will reduce the administrative and financial impact of VAT by increasing the VAT registration threshold from £85,000 to £90,000 from April the 1st, the first increase in 7 years. That will bring tens of thousands of businesses out of paying VAT altogether and encourage many more to invest and grow. I now move to measures to address historic underinvestment in our nations and regions. Since we started levelling up in 2019, 2/3 of all new salaried jobs have been created outside London and the South East. We've announced 13 investment zones and 12 free ports, which continue to attract investment, including recently, thanks to the efforts of Mayor Ben Houchen from the Numa Group, who are investing £15 million into the Tees Valley investment zone. Today, working with the Levelling Up Secretary, I devolve further power to local leaders who are best placed to promote growth in their areas. I can announce the North East Trailblazer devolution deal, providing a package of support for the region potentially worth over £100 million. I'll devolve powers to Buckinghamshire, Warwickshire and to the most beautiful county in England, Surrey. I see the Leader of the Opposition smiling because, like me, he is a Surrey boy. I know he's been taking advice from Lord Mandelson, who yesterday rather uncharitably said he needed to shed a few pounds. Ordinary families will shed more than a few pounds if that lot get in. Today, if he wants to join me on my marathon training, he's most welcome as well. Today, we continue to spread opportunity throughout the country by allocating £100 million of levelling up funding to areas including High Peak, Dundee, Conway, Erewash, Redditch and Coventry to support cultural projects in these communities, alongside support for capital projects across the country, including in Bingley. We are expanding the long-term plan for towns to 20 new places, including Darlington, home of the Treasury's fantastic Darlington Economic Campus, Coleraine, Peterhead, Runcorn, Harlow, Eastbourne, Arbroath and Rhyl, providing each with £20 million of funding to invest in community regeneration over the next decade. We'll provide £15 million in new funding to the West Midlands Combined Authority to support culture, heritage and investment projects on the recommendation of our go-getting Mayor Andy Street. And we'll allocate £5 million to renovate hundreds of local village halls across England so they can remain at the heart of their communities. And because this is a Conservative and Unionist government, we'll also set aside funding to support the Saxavord Spaceport in Shetland, an agri-food launchpad in mid-Wales, and funding to support Northern Ireland's businesses to expand global trade and investment opportunities. As a result of the decisions we take today, the Scottish Government will receive nearly £300 million in Barnet consequentials, with nearly £170 million for the Welsh Government and £100 million for the Northern Ireland Executive. I do appreciate that a tax-cutting budget is very uncomfortable for the biggest tax risers in the United Kingdom. We also want to level up opportunity across the generations, including building more houses for young people, and we're on track to deliver over 1 million homes in this Parliament. Last week, the Levelling Up Secretary allocated £188 million to support projects in Sheffield, Blackpool and Liverpool, and today I go further, allocating £242 million of investments in Barking Riverside and Canary Wharf, which together will build nearly 8,000 houses, as well as transforming Canary Wharf into a new hub for life science companies. We're launching a new £20 million community-led housing scheme supporting local communities to deliver the developments they want and need, and I'm pleased to announce the next steps for Cambridge to reach its potential to be the world's leading scientific powerhouse. I confirm there will be a long-term funding settlement for the Future Development Corporation in Cambridge at the next spending review, with over £10 million invested in the coming year to unlock delivery of crucial local transport and health infrastructure. The final levelling up measures I announced today support North Wales, where I have many happy childhood memories, in mould, following representations from the Honourable Member for the Vale of Clwyd. We will help fund the renovation of Theatre Clwyd. And I can announce this week the Government has reached agreement on a £160 million deal with Hitachi to purchase the Wilfer site in Innismarn and the Oldbury site in South Gloucestershire. Innismarn has a vital role in delivering our nuclear ambitions, and no one should take more credit for today's announcement than my tireless, tenacious and turbocharged honourable friend Innismarn. More investment by large businesses, more support for small businesses, promoting investment in our nations and regions, all part of a budget for long-term growth that sticks to our plan to deliver more jobs, better public services and lower taxes. I now turn to one of the most powerful ways to attract investment, namely supporting our most innovative industries. Outside the US, we have the most respected universities, the biggest financial services sector, and the largest tech ecosystem in Europe. We have double the AI startups of anywhere in Europe, double the venture capital investment, and a tech economy now double the size of Germany and 3 times the size of France. We're on track to become the world's next Silicon Valley. In today's budget for long-term growth, I take further steps to attract investment into our technology-related industries. I want our brilliant tech entrepreneurs not just to start here, but to stay here, including when the time comes for a stock market listing. So we'll build on the Edinburgh and Mansion House reforms to unlock more pension fund capital. We'll give new powers to the Pensions Regulator and Financial Conduct Authority to ensure better value from defined contribution schemes by judging performance on overall returns, not cost. We'll make sure there are vehicles to make it easier for pension funds to invest in UK growth opportunities. So I'm today publishing the names of the winners of the LIFTS competition. But I remain concerned that other markets, such as Australia, generate better returns for pension savers with more effective investment strategies and more investment in high-quality domestic growth stocks. So I will introduce new requirements for DC and local government pension funds to disclose publicly their level of international and UK equity investment, and I'll then consider what further action should be taken if we're not on a positive trajectory towards international best practice. I also want to create opportunities for a new generation of retail investors to engage with public markets. So we'll proceed with the retail sale for part of the government's remaining NatWest shares this summer, at the earliest opportunity, subject to supportive market conditions and value for money. We'll continue to explore how savers could be allowed to take their pension pots with them when they change job. We'll make it easier for people to save for the long term with a new British savings bond delivered through National Savings and Investment, offering savers a guaranteed rate fixed for 3 years. And today, following calls from over 200 representatives of the city and our high-growth sectors. I will reform the ISA system to encourage more people to invest in UK assets. After a consultation on its implementation, I will introduce a brand new British ISA, which will allow an additional £5,000 annual investment for investments in UK equity with all the tax advantages of other ISAs. And this will be on top of the existing ISA allowances, ensure British savers can benefit from the growth of the most promising UK businesses, as well as supporting those businesses with the capital to expand. And I turn now to our other growth industries, starting with clean energy. We want nuclear to provide up to a quarter of our electricity by 2050. And as part of that, I want the UK to lead the global race in developing cutting-edge nuclear technologies. I can therefore announce that Great British Nuclear will begin the next phase of the small modular reactor selection process, with companies now having until June to submit their initial tender responses. Our brilliant Energy Security and Net Zero Secretary will also allocate up to £120 million more to the Green Industries Growth Accelerator to build supply chains for new technology ranging from offshore wind to carbon capture and storage. By January of next year, as promised in the autumn statement, we'll have a new faster connections process to the grid up and running. In advanced manufacturing, we've announced a further £270 million of investment into innovative new automotive and aerospace R&D projects, building the UK's capabilities in zero-emission vehicle and clean aviation technologies. And I now turn to our creative industries. We have become Europe's largest film and TV production centre, with Idris Elba, Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom all filming their latest productions here. Studio space in the UK has doubled in the last 3 years, and at the current rate of expansion, next year we will be second only to Hollywood globally. In the autumn statement, I committed to providing more tax relief for visual effects in film and high-end TV. I can today confirm that we will increase the rate of tax credit by 5% and remove the 80% cap for visual effects costs in the audiovisual expenditure credit. Having worked closely with the Culture Secretary and listened carefully to representations from companies like Pinewood, Warner Brothers and Sky Studios, we'll provide eligible film studios in England with a 40% relief on their gross business rates until 2034. And having heard representations from the British Film Industry Pact and indeed the Prime Minister, we will introduce a new tax credit for UK independent films with a budget of less than £15 million. For our creative industries more broadly, we will provide £26 million of funding to our preeminent theatre, the National Theatre, to upgrade its stages. And today I particularly want to recognise the contribution of our creative industries and the tourism that comes from orchestras, museums, galleries and theatres. In the pandemic, we introduced higher 45% and 50% levels of tax relief, which were due to end in March 25. They have been a lifeline for performing arts across the country. Today, in recognition of their vital importance to our national life, I can announce I am making those tax reliefs permanent at 45% for touring and orchestral productions and 40% for non-touring productions. Lord Lloyd Webber says this will be a once-in-a-generation transformational change that will ensure Britain remains the global capital of creativity. I suspect the new theatre reliefs may be of particular interest to the Shadow Chancellor, who seems to fancy her thespian skills when it comes to acting like a Tory. The trouble is, we all know how her show ends. Higher taxes, like every Labour government in history. I'm delighted they are cheering the fact that Labour governments always put up taxes. They're right. And I also want to mention our life sciences sector. where we will support research by medical charities into diseases such as cancer, dementia and epilepsy, with an additional £45 million, including £3 million for Cancer Research UK. But I have long believed we should be manufacturing medicines as well as developing them. So I can today also announce a brand new investment by one of our greatest life science companies, AstraZeneca, led by mon ami, the irrepressible Sir Pascal Soriot. AstraZeneca made their COVID vaccine available to developing countries at cost, as a result saving over 6 million lives. And today, because of the government's support for the life sciences sector, they announced plans to invest £650 million in the UK to expand their footprint on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus and fund the building of a vaccine manufacturing hub in Speke in Liverpool. More investment, better jobs in every corner of the country in a long-term budget for growth from a Conservative government. One of the biggest barriers to investment is businesses not being able to hire the staff they need. The economy today has around 900,000 vacancies. It would be easy to fill them with higher migration, but with over 10 million adults of working age who are not in work, that would be economically and morally wrong. Those who can work should. And this is an issue that I have tackled in every budget and autumn statement I've delivered. A year ago, I abolished the pensions lifetime allowance, which pushed doctors and others to take early retirement. Ask any doctor what they think about Labour's plans to bring it back, and they will say, don't go back to square one. In the autumn, with the help of our superb Work and Pensions Secretary, we announced the Back to Work plan, which will support 1 million adults with medical conditions and reduce the number of people assessed as not needing to work by 2/3. A year ago, I also announced the biggest ever expansion of childcare, extending the 30-hour free childcare offer. Just listen. Extending the 30-hour free childcare offer to all children of working parents from 9 months. We've not had a childcare plan from Labour, so you might want to listen to ours. Our plan will mean an extra 60,000 parents enter the workforce in the next 4 years, a tremendous achievement for the Education Secretary, who I think is doing an effing good job. And today, following representations from many people, including the CBI, I announced measures to support the childcare sector make the new investments it now needs to. So I am guaranteeing the rates that will be paid to childcare providers to deliver our landmark offer for children over 9 months old for the next 2 years. That is more people in work, more jobs, sticking to our plan in a long-term budget for growth. And I now turn to public services. I thought they were supposed to be interested in public services. I can wait.
Order. A little bit of murmuring is normal. I shouldn't be able to hear what you're saying over there. That is clearly out of order. Now, let's have some courtesy. Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Good public services need a strong economy to pay for them. But a strong economy also needs good public services. In 2010, schools in the UK were behind Germany, France and Sweden in the OECD's PISA education rankings for reading and maths. Now, after Conservative reforms, we are ahead of them. Burglaries and violent crime have halved in the last 14 years after we invested in 20,000 more police officers. Our armed forces remain the most professional and best funded in Europe, With defence spending already more than 2% of GDP, we're providing more military support to Ukraine than nearly any other country, and our spending will rise to 2.5% as soon as economic conditions allow. The NHS is still recovering from the pandemic, but has 42,000 more doctors and 71,000 more nurses than it did under Labour. That is 250 more doctors and 400 more nurses for every single month that we've been in office. Now, resources matter, of course, which is why, despite all the economic shocks we have faced, overall spending on public services has gone up since 2010, in the case of the NHS by more than a third in real terms. But although spending has continued to rise every year, public sector productivity still remains below pre-pandemic levels by nearly 6%. This demonstrates that the way to improve public services is not always more money or more people. We also need to run them more efficiently. We need a more productive state, not a bigger state. In autumn 2022, I set day-to-day spending to increase by 1% a year in real terms over the next Parliament. Some say that's not enough and we should raise spending by more. Others say it's too much and we should cut it to improve efficiency. Neither are right. It's not fair to ask taxpayers to pay for more when public service productivity has fallen. Nor would it be wise to reduce that funding given the pressures public services face. So I am keeping the planned growth in day-to-day spending at 1% in real terms, but we are going to spend it better. So today, they don't have a plan for public services, like everything else. So why not listen to ours? Today I am announcing a landmark public sector productivity plan that restarts public service reform and changes the Treasury's traditional approach to public spending. And I start with our biggest and most important public service, the NHS. One of my greatest privileges was to be Health Secretary. Thanks to the NHS, I have 3 gorgeous children, the oldest of whom has been patiently listening in the gallery. The NHS is rightly the biggest reason most of us are proud to be British, but the systems that support its staff are often antiquated. Doctors, nurses and ward staff spend hours every day filling out forms when they could be...
Mr. Streeting,
when patients don't show up...
I don't like to interrupt the Chancellor. You're too close to me to be shouting that loudly. If you want to shout that loudly, you should concentrate away up there. I apologise for interrupting the Chancellor.
When patients don't show up, or one member of a team is ill, operating theatres are left empty despite long waiting lists. Now, when we published the NHS long-term workforce plan, I asked the NHS to put together a plan to transform its efficiency and productivity. I wanted better care for patients, more job satisfaction for staff, and better value for taxpayers. Making changes on the scale we need is not cheap. The investment needed to modernise NHS IT systems so they're as good as the best in the world costs £3.4 billion. But it helps unlock £35 billion of savings, 10 times that amount. So in today's budget for long-term growth, I have decided to fund the NHS productivity plan in full. Yeah. With that new investment, we will slash the 13 million hours lost by doctors and nurses every year to outdated IT systems. We will cut down and potentially halve form filling by doctors using AI. We will digitise operating theatre processes, allowing the same number of consultants to do an extra 200,000 operations a year. We'll fund improvements to help doctors read MRI and CT scans more accurately and quickly, speeding up results for 130,000 patients every year and saving thousands of lives, something I know would have delighted my brother Charlie, who I recently lost to cancer. We'll improve the NHS app so it can be used to confirm and modify all appointments, reducing up to half 500,000 missed appointments annually and improving patient choice. We'll set up a new NHS staff app to make it easier to roster electronically and end the use of expensive off-framework agencies. And as a result of this funding, all hospitals will use electronic patient records, making the NHS the largest digitally integrated healthcare system in the world. Today's announcement doubles the amount the NHS is investing on digital transformation over 3 years. And on top of this longer-term transformation, we'll also help the NHS meet pressures in the coming year with an additional £2.5 billion. This will allow the NHS to continue its focus on reducing waiting times and brings the total increase in NHS funding since the start of the Parliament to 13% in real terms. The NHS was there for us in the pandemic, and today, with nearly £6 billion of additional funding, a Conservative government is there for the NHS. The head of the NHS, Amanda Pritchard, today says that this investment shows the government continues to back the NHS. She says that as a result of it, the NHS can commit to delivering 1.9% annual productivity growth over the next Parliament, more than double the average productivity growth in public services between 2010 and 2019. But today is not just about the NHS. I want this groundbreaking agreement with the NHS to be a model for all our public services. Across education, the police, the courts and local government, I want to see more efficient, better value and higher quality public services. So today I can announce that in the next spending review, the Treasury will do things differently. We will prioritise proposals that deliver annual savings within 5 years, equivalent to the total cost of the investment required. And today we make a start with some excellent proposals. Violence reduction units and hotspot policing have prevented an estimated 136,000 knife crimes and other violent offences, as well as over 3,000 hospital admissions. Every crime costs money, so we will provide £75 million to roll that model out in England and Wales. Police officers waste around 8 hours a week on unnecessary admin. With higher productivity, we could free the equivalent of 20,000 police officers over a year. So we will spend £230 million rolling out time and money-saving technology, which speeds up police response times by allowing people to report crimes by video call and, where appropriate, use drones as first responders. Too many legal cases, particularly in family law, should never go to court, and it would cost us less if they didn't. So we'll spend £170 million to fund non-court resolution, reduce reoffending and digitise the court process. Too many children in care end up being looked after by unregistered providers that are much more expensive. So we'll invest £165 million over the next 4 years to reduce that cost by increasing the capacity of the Children's Homes estate. Special education need provision can be excellent when outsourced to independent sector schools, but also expensive. So we'll invest £105 million over the next 4 years to build 15 new special free schools to create additional high-quality places and increase choice for parents. And we'll also put in place a plan to realise the tens of billions of savings recommended in an excellent speech by the head of the National Audit Office. The OBR say a 5% increase in public sector productivity will be the equivalent of around £20 billion in extra funding. With these plans, we can deliver that and more. And if we ensure they are cash-releasing savings, as we are committed to doing, it will be possible to live with more constrained spending growth without cutting services valued by the public. So with the energy and drive of my talented Chief Secretary to the Treasury, we launched our public sector productivity plan in today's budget for long-term growth, more investment, more jobs, better public services, and one more thing, lower taxes. Keeping taxes down matters to Conservatives in a way it never can for Labour. We believe that in a free society, the money you earn doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to you. And if we want to encourage hard work, we should let people keep as much of their own money as possible. Conservatives look around the world at economies in North America and Asia and notice that countries with lower taxes generally have higher growth. Now, economists argue about cause and correlation, but we know that lower taxed economies have more energy, more dynamism and more innovation, and we know that's Britain's future too. Before I explain how we will bring down taxes, I start with some measures to make our system simpler and fairer. To discourage non-smokers from taking up vaping, we're today confirming the introduction of an excise duty on vaping products from October 26 and publishing a consultation on its design. Because vapes can also play a positive role in helping people quit smoking, we'll introduce a one-off increase in tobacco duty at the same time to maintain the financial incentive to choose vaping over smoking. I'll make a one-off adjustment to rates of air passenger duty on non-economy flights only to account for high inflation in recent years, and I'll provide HMRC with the resources they need to ensure everyone pays the tax they owe, leading to an increase in revenue collected of over £4.5 billion across the forecast period. Next, I turn to property taxation. In recent months, following tenacious representation from the honourable members for St Austell and Newquay, North Devon, cities of London and Westminster, Torbay and Truro and Falmouth, I have been looking closely at our furnished holiday lettings tax regime. I am concerned that this tax regime is creating a distortion, meaning there are not enough properties available for long-term rental by local people. So to make the tax system work better for local communities, I'm going to abolish the furnished holiday lettings regime. I've also been looking at stamp duty relief for people who purchase more than one dwelling in a single transaction, known as multiple dwellings relief. I see the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party paying close attention, given her multiple dwellings.
Too much excitement. We haven't actually heard, because we can't hear what the Chancellor is trying to say. OK, and I can hear who is shouting there. You won't get to speak later. Chancellor.
I'm sorry to disappoint her, but multiple dwellings relief was not actually designed for her, but intended to... It was intended to support investment in the private rented sector, but an external evaluation found no strong evidence that it had done so and that it was being regularly abused, so I'm going to abolish it. And finally, as part of this budget, both the Treasury, a part of our look on property taxation, both the Treasury and the OBR have looked at the costs associated with our current levels of capital gains tax on property. They have concluded that if we reduced the higher 28% rate that exists for residential property, we would in fact increase revenues because there would be more transactions. For the first time in history, both the Treasury and the OBR have discovered their inner Laffer curve. So today I am going to reduce the higher rate of property capital gains tax from 28% to 24%. That really is for you, Angela.
Enough from over there, definitely not having it from here. Chancellor.
I now turn to oil and gas. Unlike the party opposite, we want to encourage investment in the North Sea, so we will retain generous investment allowances for the sector. We'll also legislate in the Finance Bill to abolish the energy profits levy should market prices fall to their historic norm for a sustained period of time, after representations from the Honourable Member for Banff and Buchan. But because the increase in energy prices caused by the Ukraine war is expected to last longer, so too will the sector's windfall profits. So I will extend the sunset on the energy profits levy for an additional year to 2029, raising £1.5 billion. Next, I turn to the taxes paid by those who are resident in the UK but not domiciled here for tax purposes. This is a category of people known as non-doms. Now, Nigel Lawson wanted to end the non-dom regime in his great tax reforming budget of 1988, which is where I suspect the Labour Party got the idea from. But I, too, have always believed that provided we protect the UK's attractiveness to international investors, those with the broadest shoulders should pay their fair share. After looking at the issue over many months, I've concluded that we can indeed introduce a system which is both fairer and remains competitive with other countries. So the government will abolish the current tax system for non-doms, get rid of the outdated concept of domicile, and I aim to please all sides of the House in all my budgets. And we will replace...
Order. This is impossible. Right? Can you just... Order! Could you please shout more quietly? Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will replace the non-dom regime with a modern, simpler and fairer residency-based system. From April 25, new arrivals to the UK will not be required to pay any tax on foreign income and gains for their first 4 years of UK residency, a more generous regime than at present and one of the most attractive offers in Europe. But after 4 years, those who continue to live in the UK will pay the same tax as other UK residents. Recognising the contribution of many of these individuals to our economy, we will put in place transitional arrangements for those benefiting from the current regime. That will include a 2-year period in which individuals will be encouraged to bring wealth earned overseas to the UK, where it can be spent and invested here, a measure that will attract onshore an additional £15 billion of foreign income and generate more than £1 billion of extra tax. Overall, abolishing non-dom status will raise £2.7 billion a year by the end of the forecast period. That is money the party opposite planned to use for spending increases, but today a Conservative government makes a different choice. We use that revenue to help cut taxes on working families. And many of those families, Madam Deputy Speaker, depend on child benefit. But the way we treat child benefit in the tax system is confusing and unfair. It's a lifeline for many parents because it helps with the additional costs associated with having children. And when it works, it's good for children, good for parents, and good for the economy because it helps people into work. But we currently withdraw child benefit when one parent earns over £50,000 a year. That means two parents earning £49,000 a year receive the benefit in full, but a household earning a lot less than that does not, if just one parent earns over £50,000. Today, I set out plans to end that unfairness. Doing so requires significant reform to the tax system, including allowing HMRC to collect household-level information. We'll therefore consult on moving the high-income child benefit charge to a household-based system to be introduced by April 2026. But because that is not a quick fix, I make two changes today to make the current system fairer. Following representations from my right honourable friends from Penistone and Stocksbridge, Carshalton and Wallington, Bassetlaw and West Worcestershire, along with many others, I confirm that from this April, the high-income child benefit charge threshold will be raised from £50,000 to £60,000. We will raise the top of the taper, at which it's withdrawn, to £80,000. That means no one earning under £60,000 will pay the charge, taking 170,000 families out of paying it altogether. And because of the higher taper and threshold, nearly 500,000 families with children will save an average of £1,300 next year. According to the OBR, this change will see an increase in hours amongst those already working to the equivalent of 10,000 more people entering the workforce. More investment, more jobs, better public service and lower tax. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is one further set of changes I want to make today. The way we tax people's income is particularly unfair. If you get your income from having a job, you pay two types of tax: national insurance contributions and income tax. If you get it from other sources, you pay only one. This double taxation of work is unfair. The result is a complicated system that penalises work instead of encouraging it. If we are to build a high-wage, high-skill economy not dependent on migration, if we want to encourage people not in work to come back to work, we need a simpler, fairer tax system that makes work pay. That is why I cut national insurance contributions in the autumn. By reducing the penalty on work, the OBR said that tax cut would lead to the equivalent of 94,000 more people in work. In other words, it would fill more than 1 in 10 vacancies throughout the economy. Lower taxes, more jobs and higher growth. Today, because of the progress we have made bringing down inflation, because of the additional investment that is flowing into the economy, because we have a plan for better and more efficient public services, and because we have asked those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more.
Order. Mr. Perkins. I can manage, thank you very much. 5 times I've heard what you said. I let you away with it. Now that's enough. One more strike and you're out.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do know how hard it is for them to listen to arguments for lower taxes. But that is the difference. Because we have asked those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more, today I go further. From April the 6th, employee national insurance will be cut by another 2p from 10% to 8%. And self-employed national insurance will be cut from 8% to 6%. It means an additional £450 a year for the average employee, or £350 for someone self-employed. When combined with the autumn reductions, it means 27 million employees will get an average tax cut of £900 a year. 2 million self-employed will get a tax cut averaging £650, changes that make our system simpler and fairer, and changes that grow our economy by rewarding work. The OBR say, when combined with the autumn reduction, our national insurance cuts will mean the equivalent of 200,000 more people in work, filling 1 in 5 vacancies, adding 0.4% to GDP and 0.4% to GDP per head. This is the second fiscal event where we've reduced employee and self-employed national insurance. We've cut it by 1/3 in 6 months without increasing borrowing and without cutting spending on public services. That means the average earner in the UK now has the lowest effective personal tax rate since 1975. Their effective taxes are now lower than in America, France, Germany, or any G7 country, because Conservatives believe that making work pay is of the most fundamental importance. Because we believe that the double taxation of work is unfair, our long-term ambition is to end this unfairness when it is responsible, when it can be achieved without increasing borrowing, when it can be delivered without compromising high-quality public services. We will continue to cut national insurance as we have done today, so we truly make work pay. Madam Deputy Speaker, we stick to our plan with a budget for long-term growth. It delivers more investment, more jobs, better public services and lower taxes. But dynamism in an economy doesn't come from ministers in Whitehall. It comes from the grit and determination of people who take risks, work hard and innovate. Not government policies, but people power. It is to unleash people power that we today put this country back on the path to lower taxes. A plan to grow the economy versus no plan. A plan for better public services versus no plan. A plan to make work pay versus no plan. Growth up, jobs up, taxes down. I commend this statement to the House.
Standing Order number 51, the first motion entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions: stamp duty, land tax, first-time buyers relief, new leases acquired on fair trust, motion number 8. Stamp duty, land tax, registered providers of social housing, motion number 9. Stamp duty, land tax, purchases by public bodies, motion number 10. Value added tax, late payment interest and repayment interest, motion number 22. As matters that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Order, let me explain for the clarification of the House that this is the provisional point, which is the provisional question which is asked at this stage, and that all members will have the opportunity, having heard the debate in detail, to vote on each of these motions next Tuesday, the 12th of March, at the end of the budget debate. I would hesitate to have a division at this point when the House and the world is awaiting the response from the Leader of the Opposition. So I'm going to put this motion again, and if it is very clear to me that the ayes have more votes than the noes, I will take it on the voices. The question is, no, I don't need a point of order, thank you. We're in the middle of a division. Thank you. The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act, as I said a few moments ago, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. Division. Clear the lobby.
Should have shouted.
The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. Stamp duty land tax, motion number 8. Stamp duty land tax, motion number 9. Stamp duty land tax, motion number 10. And value added tax, motion number 22. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Aaron Bell and Robert Largan. Tellers for the noes, Gavin Newlands and Kirsty Blackman. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 288. The noes to the left, 38.
The ayes to the right, 288. The noes to the left, 38. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to the motion entitled Income Tax Charge. It is on this motion that the debate will take place today and on the succeeding days. The questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will be put at the end of the budget debate on Tuesday, the 12th of March. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion formally. The question is that income tax is charged for the tax year 2024 to 25, and it is declared that it is expedient in the public interest that this resolution should have statutory effect under the provisions of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There we have it, the last desperate act of a party that has failed. Britain in recession, the national credit card maxed out, and despite the measures today, the highest tax burden for 70 years. The first Parliament since records began to see living standards fall, confirmed by this budget today. That is their record. It is still their record. Give with one hand and take even more with the other. And nothing they do between now and the election will change that. I mean, over 14 years, we've seen our fair share of delusion from the party opposite. A Prime Minister who thinks the cost of living crisis is starting to ease. An Education Secretary who thinks concrete crumbling on our children deserves her gratitude. A former Prime Minister who still believes crashing the pound was the right path for Britain.
Where is she?
And today, a new entry in this hall of infamy, the Chancellor, who breezes into this chamber in a recession and tells the working people of this country that everything's on track. Crisis? What crisis? Or, as the captain of the Titanic and the former Prime Minister herself might have said, iceberg? What iceberg? Smiling as the ship goes down, the Chuckle Brothers of decline, dreaming of Santa Monica, or maybe just a quiet life in Surrey, not having to self-fund his election. Whilst the crew behind them scrabble for duty news budget. If only it weren't so serious, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the story of this Parliament is devastatingly simple. A Conservative party stubbornly clinging to the failed ideas of the past, completely unable to generate the growth working people need, and forced by that failure to ask them to pay more and more for less and less. And as the desperation grows, they torch not only their reputation for fiscal responsibility, but any notion that they can serve the country, not themselves. Party first, country second, while working people pay the price. Food prices still 25% higher than they were 2 years ago. Rents up 10%. An extra £240 a month for a typical family remortgaging this year, because they lost control of the economy, they sent interest rates through the roof, they made working people pay. They should be under no illusion. That record is how the British people will judge today's cuts, because the whole country can see exactly what is happening here. They recognise a Tory con when they see it, just as they did in November. Give with one hand, take even more with the other. Madam Deputy Speaker, people have been living through this nonsense for 14 years. They know the thresholds are still frozen, dragging more and more people into higher taxes. They know that a Tory stealth tax is coming their way in the shape of their next council tax bill. The Levelling Up Secretary has told not just this House, but every house in the country he's coming for their council tax. Give with one hand, gove in the other. But most insultingly of all, the British people know the only cause that gets this lot out of bed is trying to save their own skin. Take the desperate move after years of resistance to finally accept Labour's argument on the non-dom tax regime. Has there ever been a more obvious example of a government that is totally bereft of ideas? And if they're sincere in support of this policy now, then the question they must answer today is, why did they not do it earlier? Why did they not stand up to their friends, their funders and their family? Because if they had followed Labour's example, 3.8 million extra operations would have taken place by now. 1.3 million emergency dental appointments, 3 breakfast clubs for nearly 4.5 million children. But if, instead, this is just another short-term, cynical political gimmick, then honestly, what is the point of them? What is the point of a party that is out of touch, out of ideas, and nearly out of road? And we saw it last year as well, when only Labour's policies on the cost of living made the difference. For those opposite, now a little downbeat about another intellectual triumph for social democracy, I say get used to it, because with this pair in charge, it won't be long before they ask you to defend the removal of private school tax relief as well. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the harder they try with cynical games like this, the worse it will get for them, because the whole country can see exactly who they are, fighting for themselves, politics not governing, party first, country second. Madam Deputy Speaker, because we have campaigned to lower the tax burden on working people for the whole Parliament, and we won't stop now, we will support the cuts to national insurance today. But I noticed this. In 2022, when the Prime Minister was Chancellor, he made this promise. I can confirm in 2024, for the first time, the basic rate of income tax will be cut from 20 to 19 pence. Having briefed that all week that an income tax was coming, that promise is in tatters today. And of course, we support the fresh investment in our NHS, although I have to note that the Chancellor, when he was Health Secretary 10 years ago, promised to make the NHS paperless by 2018. And I know the Prime Minister's fondness for Elon Musk extends to an enthusiastic embrace of his community notes on fact-checking. So I'll say this bit slowly. Labour supports the fuel duty freeze. That is our policy. And I look forward to the Prime Minister's acknowledgement of that in coming days. We do ask the Chancellor can set out how we will make sure that this policy gets passed on to hard-pressed families at the pump. Yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, for all the fanfare around the tax measures today, that straightforward story remains true. Taxes, a 70-year high. The British people paying more for less. An unprecedented hit to living standards of working people. The first time they've gone backwards over a parliament, and they were cheering that today. And the reason is equally simple. There is no plan for growth. How can there be? He can say long-term plan all he likes. We see there are... Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, last year he announced 110 growth measures. He said we've turned the corner. And where are we now? Britain in recession. An economy smaller than when the Prime Minister entered Downing Street. The textbook definition of decline, that is their record. I mean, after 14 years, who do they actually think feels better off? Productivity is flat. Mortgages through the roof. House building off a cliff. Worklessness rising and rising. Homelessness never higher. Crime virtually unpunished. Children who can't see a dentist. Sewage in our rivers. Billions and billions of taxpayers' money wasted. 7 billion by the Prime Minister on COVID fraud alone. 500 million on the Rwanda scheme that has achieved precisely nothing. I can keep going. A railway line that will never reach our great northern cities. In fact, it might not even reach central London. Billions upon billions for a white elephant without a trunk. While today we learn taxpayers are picking up the bill for the Science Minister's libel. And all the time, one thing that is growing, the waiting list in our NHS, now nearly 8 million. They've had 14 years. 14 years running out of road. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is what decline looks like. And the complacency they've shown today, it takes your breath away. Britain deserves better than this. Britain deserves a real plan for growth, an end to 14 years of stagnation, wealth creation across the whole of the country, higher living standards for working people. This is the mission we need. But yet again, what we got was the same tired old formula, the sticking plasters, the chopping and changing, the party first, country second politics, with no repudiation of the utterly discredited idea that economic growth is something the few gift to the many. But even then, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think his backbenchers are owed an explanation. Because when the Chancellor says Britain has grown more quickly than countries like Germany over the last 14 years, I'm sure they will be shocked to learn that this is a statistical sleight of hand. And when it comes to GDP per capita, in other words, the growth that makes the difference to the pockets of working people, their record is much worse. Indeed, in per capita terms, our economy has not grown since the first quarter of 2022, the longest period of stagnation Britain has seen since 1955. In fact, the Chancellor invited us to look at those figures. The OBR says GDP per capita will be 0.75% lower in 2028 than was they forecast in November of last year. That was the number he said we should watch. 0.75% lower in 2028. And they can call this a technical recession, but there's nothing technical about working people living in recession for every second the Prime Minister has been in power. This is a Rishi recession. And if the party opposite really wants to know what hides in the Chancellor's spreadsheets, then they will see that it's only the record levels of migration they have delivered which has prevented an even deeper decline. And that is the record they must stand on at the election. Because while on these benches we do not demean for a second the contribution migrants make to a thriving economy, it is high time the party opposite was honest with the British public about the role migration plays in their economic policy. Because right now, in terms of growth, that is all they have. There is nothing else. No plan to get Britain building again with a reformed planning system. No ambition to invest in clean British power for cheaper bills and energy security. No inclination to move away from insecure, low-paid jobs and strengthen employment rights so we can finally make work pay. Madam Deputy Speaker, where is the urgency on affordable housing? How can they look at Britain now and not see this as a massive priority? Never again will they be allowed to pose as the party of home ownership and aspiration. I have to say, given the disaster that's befallen his childcare plans, perhaps that's for the best. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the cost of childcare is a huge challenge for millions. Parents need him to deliver on his promise. And it seems the Chancellor's been taking lessons on marketing from the Willy Wonka experience in Glasgow. All is not as it seems. And with just over 3 weeks to go, he has to come clean. Because up and down the country, parents need to know, will they get their entitlement in April, or is it just another of their reckless promises on governing? Headlines over delivery, promises without plans, policies that unravel at the first contact with reality. The lesson crystal clear that those who broke our economy cannot be trusted to repair it. The Tory credit rating is 0. It's time for change with Labour. And that's what today's budget should have been about. A last chance for the government to show it understands the economic reality of our volatile world, that global supply chains can be weaponised by tyrants like Putin, that a sticking plaster approach to public investment will cost Britain more in the long run, and that trickle-down nonsense means working people pay the price. It could even have been a moment of contrition, a reflection on their fiscal recklessness, an apology, perhaps, for the ridiculous chaos they've inflicted on businesses, communities and investors in this country. And yet still no sustainable industrial strategy, still no national wealth fund to crowd in private investment, still no urgency on speeding up critical infrastructure projects, and no recognition that they have left our standing as a country that always keeps its promises in tatters. And if they don't like that accusation, then look no further than the grotesque spectacle of ducking their responsibility to the victims of infected blood and Horizon scandal. One of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. Those were the Prime Minister's words just 2 months ago. Today, justice kicked beyond the general election. No, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain can see exactly who they are. And the reality is there is no path to economic stability, no way to a calmer, less chaotic politics with the party opposite in power, because chaos is now their worldview, a mindset that sees Britain's problems as opportunities they can exploit. Whether, like the Chancellor, that's out of desperation because they can't solve them, or whether, like the members for Fareham or South West Norfolk, they have no intention of solving them whatsoever. For a party this weak and divided, the end result is always the same. A vicious downward spiral. Chaos feeding off decline, decline feeding off chaos, while working people pay the price. The British people know this will not stop. 5 more years and it will only get worse. There will be no change of direction without a change of government. And that leaves Britain a nation in limbo, unable to shake off the Tory chaos that dragged us into recession and loaded the tax burden onto the backs of working people and maxed out the nation's credit card. Britain deserves a government ready to take tough decisions, give our public services an immediate cash injection, stick to fiscal rules without complaint, fight for the living standards of working people and deliver a sustainable plan for growth. So we say to the Chancellor and Prime Minister, it's time to break the habit of 14 years, stop the dithering, stop the delay, stop the uncertainty and confirm May the 2nd as the date of the next general election, because Britain deserves better and Labour are ready.
I'm not going to demand silence now. This is the moment for cheering. You can do that some more. Chairman of the Select Committee, Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know it hasn't been long since we had an autumn statement, but I still think that we heard today that the Leader of the Opposition has no plan. It's not been very long since we had the last forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. So I thought it was interesting to read today that in the just over 100 days since they made their last forecast, there have been a lot of changes for the better in the UK economy. In particular, I'd like to highlight that they are expecting better inflation outturn than they were just over 3 months ago. They're expecting and have noted the sharper fall in interest rates that we all pay on the national mortgage. And they have also said that they're expecting living standards for the British people to recover more quickly than they were previously forecasting. And I think this is information that we can all welcome today, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I know there will be a range of views across this chamber about the role of the Office for Budget Responsibility. And of course, we all know that forecasts are all likely to be wrong. We will be scrutinising the Office for Budget Responsibility next Tuesday morning in the Treasury Select Committee, and we look forward to asking them the questions about their assumptions. But my view in terms of their role is a bit like the Sir Winston Churchill quote about democracy, that it's the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried. So I think that although all economic forecasts are likely to be wrong in some way, and the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts certainly often will not be the most accurate, I think it's a lot better than the alternative of either the Treasury marking its own homework or indeed better than having a budget with no forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility at all, because I think it reassures the markets on which we are so dependent for our borrowing. Now, there's obviously been good and even better progress on inflation since the peak of over 11% after Putin's evil invasion of Ukraine. And it's vital that all of today's budget measures are looked at through the lens of the inflation, because we don't want to have anything that could prevent that progress towards 2% that the Bank of England is expecting by the middle of this year. And I think that we heard today from the Chancellor that he has looked through exactly that lens when he has announced the measures today. So there are a range of things that will really help. The 5 pence off the price of fuel at the pump going on for another year will be very helpful to drivers in West Worcestershire and elsewhere in the country. The freeze on alcohol duty will be welcomed in the pubs across West Worcestershire and across the country. And the public sector productivity plan, I think, is crucial to make sure that we get value for money from our public services. Now, when it comes to the second economic objective of growth, I think we can all welcome the fact that employment growth has been so strong that the economy has created over 800 jobs a day over the last 14 years. And at previous fiscal events, we've seen steps in the plan that help grow the productive size of the UK economy, because now that we're at full employment, that becomes incredibly important because it helps sustain non-inflationary growth. So to take one example, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of stimulating that all-important investment into the economy, the big announcement a year ago was the full expensing of investment, and indeed that was made permanent at the autumn statement. Today we heard it's going to be extended to leased assets as well. And what the BBC in their fact check has noticed, that when this was first announced, it was expected that the economy would benefit greatly. The Chancellor said its impact on the economy will be huge. And the Office for Budget Responsibility said it would increase business investment by 3% a year. Well, in fact, since the policy came into force on the 1st of April, we've seen the level of business investment for the whole of the year last year was 6.1% higher than it was in 2022. So we heard today some more welcome steps that will increase business investment and other investment into the UK economy. Whether it was the tax reliefs in some of the creative industries, whether it was the announcement for British ISAs, which should encourage more investment and long-term investment into our economy, the Back to Work plan, the childcare plan. There were lots of other measures that will unlock growth. I will give way.
For giving way, but I just wonder if she thinks that the Chancellor, indeed herself, is being a little bit complacent over the issue of investment, because although it's true that business investment is higher now than it was in 2010, it's still the lowest in the G7 and amongst the lowest in the OECD. So why haven't we seen more public investment from the Chancellor today? Because we know that public investment will crowd in that private investment. Why haven't we seen much bolder, more ambitious work on investment today, which is what this economy is crying out for?
Today from the Chancellor about how strong the growth in UK investment has been. We've heard additional investment in terms of the productivity of our National Health Service, and we also heard, and I think this is absolutely crucially important, measures that will increase the attractiveness in investment in some of the fastest growing sectors across this economy. And I give way to my friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend to give way. Does she agree with me that it's extraordinary that the honourable member for the representing the Green Party didn't welcome the 270 million for advanced manufacturing in clean aviation, in clean vehicles, the 120 million in clean tech manufacturing? This is the UK investing in the technology of clean growth, is it not?
Well, it is indeed, and I'm glad that my honourable friend welcomes it, even if it was not welcomed by the representative of the Green Party. I think that what we can see in terms of, if I just make a little, do you want to talk on investment?
I want to just take her back to what she just said about the investment in childcare, and remind her, of course, that this week brings International Women's Day, and that cost of childcare is such an important issue for so many mums in this country. And of course it was the Conservatives who rolled out the 30 hours of free childcare. It's the Conservatives who are rolling out free childcare to 2-year-olds and 9-month-olds. And we absolutely must welcome that additional investment for childcare and indeed in families through the support and child benefit that will help mums to get into well-paid jobs.
I wholeheartedly endorse what my honourable friend has said, and she is absolutely right to point to the importance of this investment in childcare in helping female employment growth. And female employment growth has already been remarkably strong over the last 14 years, and I'm confident that these measures will make further progress in increasing the non-inflationary growth capacity of the UK economy. I think there were other measures that announced today that will help on the growth front. I think cutting national insurance again is also a smart way to help growth. It not only adds money into working people's pockets, of 27 million people across this country will see an extra £900 a year in terms of money in their bank accounts, but it will also make work more attractive. And we've heard from the Office for Budget Responsibility that actually it's cutting national insurance that has the biggest marginal impact in bringing people back into work. 94,000 from the last cut. It'll be interesting to see whether they continue to expect that to have a significant impact. It's a really smart way to cut taxes for working people. And another point that I'd like to make about it is that it's UK-wide, so that it will be felt in Scotland as well. In terms of debt falling, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can see that the bond markets have stabilised. The Office for Budget Responsibility numbers confirm that progress in terms of debt. I want to just bring the House's attention to a report that we just recently published in our committee that focuses on the Bank of England and its quantitative tightening. They themselves are selling £100 billion of gilts into the market over the course of this year. They've acknowledged that this actually increases the cost to the exchequer of borrowing by probably about 1/10 to 1/4 of a percentage point. And so I think as a cross-party committee we wanted to flag up the impact that that could potentially have and send a message to the Bank of England, the independent Bank of England, about some of the ways in which quantitative tightening does have an impact on the real economy. And as a cross-party committee, we obviously are never going to agree on the level or scope of taxes between us, but one of the things that we do have unanimity, does he want to come on the fact that the rate of tax is higher in Scotland?
What I do want to raise is the issue of quantitative easing that she's just highlighted, because there's obviously going to be a very significant supply of gilts over the course of the coming period, and that obviously is going to have an impact on the gilt market, on yields that are there, and of course it will influence the Bank of England and what happens in the interest rate cycle, and crucially, out of all of that, it's going to make it pretty difficult in the coming period to see any material growth in money supply, particularly M4. That is going to impact growth, given where we are.
Well, I'm sorry he didn't acknowledge that income tax is higher in Scotland, but he does make a very good point about quantitative tightening and its impact on the real economy, and it is potentially out there as a factor that can have a real impact, and we will be watching it very closely on our committee. We're, as a cross-party committee, never going to agree on the level and scope of taxes, but we do agree that the tax system is too complicated. We have a very complicated tax system in this country with well over 1,000 different tax reliefs. But I do think that despite the abolition of the Office for Tax Simplification, there have been some major tax simplifications under this Chancellor. We've heard about the way in which he eliminated in the autumn statement the national insurance class. We've heard about how he has simplified the lifetime allowance for pensions. And we also have heard today that he has started to tackle some of the very perverse cliff edges, high marginal tax rates and disincentives to work that do exist throughout the tax system. By raising the VAT tax threshold, he has helped small businesses who may hold back because they don't want to go through that. And in terms of universal credit, we've done so much over the years to reduce those high marginal tax rates and disincentives. And so it was great to hear the Chancellor today really focus on addressing this high income child benefit charge. Yeah. When we brought it in, and I voted for it at the time, £50,000 a year was a high rate of income. With the progress in terms of higher incomes, the median income in those days was about £22,000. Now the median income is about £35,000. And so £50,000 these days is not more than about 40% over the median income. And that's why it was absolutely right today that the Chancellor recognised that in his budget statement. And he has made the taper that much less of a disincentive to people taking on work above that income level. Of course, I'd have loved to have seen him do even more, but I am very grateful for what he has done. Did someone try and intervene on me? Was that, no, I was just hallucinating there. Right, I will come to a rapid close then, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I want to say is that it is clear that on this side of the House, there is a plan. It is clear that there is a plan to get inflation down. It is clear there's a plan for increasing the growth rate and the growth capacity of the UK economy without sparking inflation again. And it's clear that there is a plan to get debt falling. And I think we can all see that that plan is working. I think we should stick to that plan and not go back to square one.
Before I call the spokesman for the SNP, it might be helpful for members. It's all right, everyone could sit down now. It might be helpful for honourable members to know that I hope to be able to manage the debate, certainly at the beginning, without a formal time limit. And if everybody speaks for around 6 to 7 minutes, then we will manage that without a formal time limit. If we can't quite manage that, we will put on a formal time limit, which will begin with around 7 minutes, but will reduce as the day goes on. I now call the spokesman for the SNP, Drew Hendry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And traditional at this point, I would thank the Chancellor for advance sight of his redacted statement. But having seen the statement, I realise I was given an entirely different redacted document. But not to worry, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've seen all the details in the press over the past day or so. Seeing those unredacted words is nice, but not essential for this response. I can also thank the Chancellor for the courtesy of staying, unlike some of his colleagues, in the chamber to listen to the words of the third party here. It doesn't happen all the time, but I think it's very, very good practice for a party that might well be in the position of third party after the next election. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor during his autumn statement said that that was a statement for growth. But what have we seen since his autumn statement? Growth has gone down. It's grown into recession, in fact. And the OBR are saying today, having steadily declined since early 2022, real GDP per person is forecast to trough at 1.25%, below its pre-pandemic peak in the first half of 2024. So that was not a statement for growth, and this is not a budget for growth. Again, I do, with the Chancellor, like to start with some measures that I would welcome from his points that he's made today. First of all, albeit the softest possible landing he could have given them, the decision to at least address the non-dom status is a positive move forward. The changes to child benefit, and here we must give credit to Paul Lewis, who's campaigned on this, and indeed, similar to the press, Paul Lewis has tweeted today that he was tipped off by the Chancellor that this was coming, so that's very good as well. The lifetime ISAs move is welcome. The R&D support for aerospace, although the smallest possible step that could have been taken in investment in this industry, again, is something to be welcomed, as is for any further investment in life sciences with this. The Chancellor has put a lot of store on productivity in his speech today. He's going to solve everything with productivity. Yet if we look back over the past 14 years, and indeed before that, one of the things that the UK has been exceptionally poor at is productivity. It hasn't budged at all. So I don't see how the Chancellor, productivity, look at the figures for Scotland. He's saying, what about Scotland? Look at the figures for Scotland over the past 14 years and we can have that debate. He said earlier that vacancies would be easy to fill with immigration. This is the party who imposed Brexit, joined by the Labour Party and now the Lib Dems, and stopped free movement. Of course it would be easy to fill vacancies with people, skilled people who want to do the jobs that we have, who want to fill those vital jobs in tourism, hospitality, the National Health Service, the Care Service, and across many other sectors. But of course that's been taken away by this place. Now his national insurance cuts today are already being measured by the economists who are looking at this, to point out that the gains will be cancelled, as was last time, by the freeze on thresholds. There's very, very little for people on low incomes, zero for 17.8 million people on less than £12,750. So there is not a lot of sense in the measure that he's taken. He also boasted about the fact of taking over with inflation at 11%, but I think it's important for us to remember the Tory government was in charge when inflation was at 11%. It is their child, this problem with inflation. And they also suggest that somehow 4% is a triumph. 4% is still 4% inflation. Prices still go up. This is, let's face it, this is a last-ditch, tone-deaf approach to desperately try to recover in the polls. It's the embodiment of the Tory party before the people. Where are the real measures that have real impact on the cost of living? The one thing that people need the most direct help with. For those living in fear of the energy bill, being told once again that their direct debits are increasing, slicing more off their take-home pay, none of this is more than cold comfort. To those people staring in disbelief as they realise that their shopping bills are more than 25% higher than they were a couple of years ago, this will stick in their throats. To those trust to their new much higher mortgages and rents directly because of reckless decisions of this place, the walls are closing in for them. And on public services, he's failed people again. Paul Johnson of the IFS noted that the Chancellor would have to explain how public services already on their knees could possibly take more cuts. So let's not forget the £19 billion he slashed from public spending in the autumn statement. They also noted the economic case for tax cuts is weak. The public finances remain in a poor position. And the Chancellor is, in his budget today, promoting a further £20 billion cut, according to the IFS. Public services have already been left struggling after 14 years of underfunding, 14 years of economic chaos and blunder, from mini-budgets to Brexit, colossal wastes of hundreds of billions of pounds, and fraud and cronyism. Public finances are now so pared to the bone that we can see the marrow. Is it any wonder that a growing number of English councils, one by one, with a Tory, Labour or Lib Dem run, are now effectively bankrupt? People in Scotland needed a budget that delivered funding that would have allowed investment for our public services, real investment in the NHS that supports families, a budget that supports families with the cost of living taken into account and properly invests in green energy. Not another austerity Chancellor taking an even bigger axe to investment than his predecessors. When it does come to that election in Scotland, they will have their say and they will have their choice. It's a clear choice between SNP calls to invest in public services and the economy and in our communities, in our town centres and city centres, in our manufacturing future, in our rural areas, in our tourism industry, in our food and drink sector, in the priorities they hold, in the values that they hold dear. These will be the major dividing lines at the general election. The Scottish Government is committed to protecting people from some of the worst Westminster policies and is making a real difference to the lives of people in Scotland despite their limited powers. The Prime Minister might be under the impression that the cost of living crisis is easing, but that assessment will be a slap in the face for households across Scotland who are still facing the consequences of over a decade of Tory cuts and mismanagement of the economy. People will see straight through attempts by the Chancellor to make up for falling living standards and underfunded public services and wage stagnation with this poorly timed national insurance cut that for most households won't improve their overall standard of life. And leaving aside his failure to deal with the fiscal drag, which, as I said, wipes out much of the benefit of the NI cuts, leaving aside the vast inequality in both benefits to the better off by his actions and the geographical effect that means London benefits much more than anywhere else, he can't escape the fact that the government has now imposed the highest tax burden since the end of World War II. Now, I want to tackle the issues of tax in Scotland. It comes there. In Scotland, our progressive moves that mean that not only do the majority of people pay less tax, but they also pay far lower council tax than in England. They're supported with free prescriptions, don't have to pay tuition fees and get the game-changing Scottish Child Payment and more. Doing what is right, investing in our people, not leaving them high and dry. Whilst the Tories cut public funding in England, the Scottish Government's progressive approach to income tax has worked to raise a significant revenue to invest in public services in Scotland. The Scottish Government's tax regime means that on average households in the lower half of the income distribution are £400 better off a year than they would be in the rest of the UK. Around 58% of households are better off under the Scottish tax and social security system than they would be in the rest of the UK. Taking a different progressive course on income tax in Scotland means that in 24-25, the Scottish Fiscal Commission estimates that the Scottish Government will have around £1.5 billion of additional revenues compared to if it had followed the UK Government's tax policies. The Scottish Government continues to reaffirm their social contract with the Scottish people, with people across Scotland reaping the benefits through, as I've said, free prescription, free university tuition, free school meals, free bus travel for the under-22s, free dental care until 26, publicly owned rail services and free childcare for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds, and 7 additional welfare payments, including, as I've noted, the revolutionary Scottish Child Payment. Now, before I move on to other matters, let's just talk about the economy and the other measure that the Chancellor mentioned today, which was freezing the tax on Scotch whisky. As in the autumn statement, we'd say that is not enough. This is a massive industry to Scotland. It's a massive export for both Scotland in terms of food and drink and indeed the UK, and yet it's still taxed at 70-odd%. They needed a cut in that tax today in order to deliver what they could do. And the fact that it wasn't addressed in the budget is a shame on them. Austerity is an ever-decreasing circle, and it's fiscal madness to pursue the same policies that have been failing so obvious for many years. Yet none of these parties can bear to face the truth that for an economy to grow, it needs proper investment, for public services to deliver, to free up the potential of our people. They need to be supported, not asset-stripped and starved of those resources. The Chancellor mentioned £2.5 billion for digitisation of the NHS in order to get those so-called productivity gains. How much of that is going to go to private companies, I wonder, when the dust settles? They should have boosted NHS spending by £15 billion to improve healthcare after the UK government imposed real terms cuts this year. Funding NHS pay properly to match Scotland, where there have been no NHS strikes and caught up for their previous cuts. Where was the announcement on settling with the victims of the contaminated blood scandal? Missing. Moving on to the economy, he should have turbocharged investment in green energy by investing at least £28 billion a year to compete in the global green energy gold rush and secure sustained economic growth. Where else is the serious high-return growth supposed to come from? We haven't heard it mentioned here today. We don't know where it is. That £28 billion is needed. The Labour advisers have told the Labour Party that £28 billion a year is needed. Everybody knows that £28 billion a year is needed, and yet none of them are willing to make the investment that's needed to protect this. The abandonment of the just transition, and it's fantastic. Oh, they're chuntering from a sedentary position on the Labour front bench. Oh dear! Oh dear! Oh dear! Imagine picking up on that one. Their big U-turn, their big abandonment of the just transition. Well, it's a pretty big U-turn. I know it's one of many, but it's a pretty big U-turn. The fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact that they're rattled, I think, just shows how much they feel this. Their and the government's abandonment of the just transition and its fantastic opportunity from the Tories and from the shadows in the Labour Party is reckless and stupid, economically and for the desperate need to act on climate change. The failure to invest in this will hold back Scotland from reaching our green energy ambitions and leave households vulnerable to future energy crises. The Chancellor must finally match the level of ambition we're seeing in other countries. They've been shown by the European Union, by the United States with their Inflation Reduction Act, that this is an issue that needs to be taken seriously, and yet they are sitting on their hands. Scotland can be at the forefront of the green energy revolution thanks to our incredible natural resources inshore and offshore wind, wave, tidal and hydro power. But with Labour and the Tories intent on pulling the rug from under the industry's feet, we risk seeing yet another generation of energy potential wasted by Westminster. So the Chancellor should finally commit to properly investing in renewables and must decouple the price of gas from the price of electricity. You cannot ensure a just transition from oil and gas for the people and communities that rely on it if you squeeze the life out of the sector overnight. We know that households across Scotland have been badly hit by the energy crisis, and proper investment in renewables can reduce the bills for households. Citizens Advice Scotland revealed that in the last 4 years they've seen the number of people requesting advice and support with energy bills increase by 14 times. The Labour Party are saying, again from a sedentary position, that I'm going on too long. I take that as a sign they're not comfortable with what I'm saying here, and they would like me to. They're bored. They're bored by the just transition. They're bored by the cost of energy that people have to bear. They're bored by all these things.
About to ask for order so that the honourable gentleman could be heard, but I think that the noise is coming from immediately behind him. But as I have, the honourable gentleman mustn't shout at me. You can shout at other people, but don't shout at me. Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can make more progress if uninterrupted, so I do appreciate your advice on that. Talking of advice, I want to come back to Citizens Advice Scotland. They revealed that in the last 4 years they've seen the number of people requesting advice and support with energy bills increase by 14 times. That's a shocking increase. Yep. And proper investment in green energy can make sure that people in Scotland never have to face an energy crisis of this scale again. Now, you could have, as I said, helped families with the cost of living by scrapping grossly unfair and unequal energy bill standing charges and using a £12 billion wealth tax to fund a £400 annual energy discount for households, reintroduced mortgage interest tax relief, capped supermarket food prices and matched the Scottish Child Payment UK-wide. He could have boosted UK finances, but he chose not to. By he could have introduced a long overdue essentials guarantee while scrapping callous policies such as the two-child limit and the benefit cap. And of course, one of the most game-changing things he could have done is finally give up on the failed experiment that has been Brexit, rejoin the EU single market and deliver economic growth. Now, the Chancellor must support businesses and introduce measures to support tourism and the hospitality industries. We know that businesses have faced a very challenging period with COVID, Brexit and increased costs from all sides, making life more difficult for people across Scotland. That's why the SNP are calling on the Chancellor to reduce the rate of VAT for the tourism and hospitality sector. It's not too late for him to do that. To reinstate VAT-free shopping for international visitors, and to implement VAT-free streets to support struggling town centres and high streets. If nothing is done to halt the decline, they continue to be ignored, as they have been for too long, then communities will suffer and far more tax will be lost in the longer term than providing them with some support. They could choose to construct these mini enterprise zones, working with devolved governments and local authorities to agree sectors and areas where support is most needed. They could benefit from the reductions in VAT, or if the need is great enough, then no VAT. This could be tied to, for example, businesses agreeing to pay the real living wage. As the Chief Executive of Marks and Spencer said yesterday, he's described operating under the current government as like, and I quote, running up a downwards escalator with a rucksack on your back. If the government can roll out free ports, then why not free ports for people? They could reduce, as I've said, alcohol duty for whisky and other spirits and support Scotland's thriving whisky sector that adds £7.1 billion to the UK economy. Businesses in Scotland can no longer afford to be held back by the UK's low-growth economy. So the Chancellor should bring in measures to support businesses that have been left paying the price for the UK government's disastrous Brexit. It's clear that the SNP is the only party committed to rejoining the EU and giving Scottish businesses the chance to access goods and talent from our 27 closest neighbours. The Scottish Government is committed to protecting people of Scotland from some of the worst Westminster policies and is making a real difference to the lives of people in Scotland despite their limited powers. The cut to the Scottish Government's capital budget and finance transactions has meant that they've had to take some very difficult decisions in this year's budget, but they're still committed to delivering for the people of Scotland. The SNP fully support the £3.3 billion package the UK Government have delivered for Northern Ireland and urge the Chancellor to make similar funding available in line with the Barnett formula to help the Scottish Government deal with the budget pressures they are facing. So the Scottish Government are freezing the council tax, or at least freezing the council tax except in Tory, Lib Dem and some Labour councils where they think that people should pay more. They're lifting 100,000 children out of poverty with measures like the Scottish Child Payment, providing support to help mitigate additional heating costs that households of the most severely disabled children and young people face in the winter months through the child winter housing payments, provide free school meals to all children in primaries 1 to 5 and eligible children throughout the school, providing all babies in Scotland with the essentials needed for the first 6 months of a child's life through the baby box, and introducing 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare to all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. Making bus travel free for 2 million people in Scotland, including all children and young people under 22, eligible disabled people and everybody 60 or over. This is just a snapshot of some of the landmark policies the Scottish Government has brought in. And all of these have been achieved against the backdrop of limited powers and being tied to a Westminster system that, as we've seen from this budget today, continues to do nothing for the people of Scotland.
Just to emphasise what...
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.